listening to Awake Radio, straight talk for the awake and aware.
No lizards, no aliens, no nonsense. This is Reality Bytes in association with Sovereign Independent UK and One World Chronicle.
Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the, what date is it today? I have no idea, 23rd I think. Bit of a panic today, I can't get home. I tried to get home at 4:30 today, M25, A1, all blocked up with an accident or something. And then I tried to get at 6:30 and I still couldn't get back. So I'm back in the office, and most of my news stories were at home, of course, as you do. So I've been rushing about for the last hour or so trying to find stuff to read out. I was going to have Sonia Poulton on, journalist, presenter, TV pundit. But she's going to come on Monday because she's launching her new site this evening. So we'll have her on Monday. And I think we'll get Alan Watt back on in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm trying to line up some other guests. But I don't know, since Easter they've gone very quiet and nobody wants to do anything really. Okay, well we start. Let me see, what have I found in the last hour? Okay, right. We've got rebellion is brewing against a political elite that has ruined Europe. Well, not before time, is it really? The political elite, that says it all. They think they're above us, and well, they are really, aren't they? They're the ones creaming in all the cash. And I read out last week about Nigel Farage and his cosy little pension scheme where he gets 71 grand or something a year, on top of his fat salary, of course. And you know, all that's in the papers today is about his yellow trousers. Fantastic, isn't it? Okay, rebellion is brewing against the political elite that has ruined Europe. The idiot in Brussels and his like may keep their jobs for now, but trust is evaporating fast. Well, did we ever have any trust in these people? I don't think so. I certainly never did. I'm occasionally asked for news of my former sparring partner, Amadou Altafaj Tardio, the European Commission official who is perhaps better known to some viewers of Newsnight as the idiot in Brussels. BBC viewers will be happy to hear that Mr. Altafaj Tardio has prospered in the 2 years since I repeatedly insulted him on the airwaves, leading him to dramatically stripping off his microphone and marching out of the studio. A Newsnight producer frog marched me out very shortly afterwards. Very reminiscent of Natalie Bennett, really. Mr. Tardio is no longer a mere Brussels media spokesman. Today he wields real power as Deputy Chef de Cabinet for Olli Rehn, a Vice President of the European Commission and European Commissioner for Economic and Monetary Affairs. Well, there's a cosy job if you ever get one. You're in charge of monetary affairs. This guy should be in prison because they've never submitted accounts for, what is it, nearly 18 years now. Now, I think if I was running a business and I didn't submit accounts for 1 year, I'd be in prison myself for the paltry sum of a couple of grand or something. I'm told that Mr. Tardio is well regarded and that further promotions may beckon. He is paid a salary of an estimated, wait for it, £115,000 a year, doubtless along with generous allowances. Yep, at least the same again, I'd say. And there is no danger at all that next month's European elections will cause him to be thrown out of his job. In short, Mr. Tardio is one of the many people in Brussels who hold power, but are in no meaningful way accountable for the appalling social and economic degradation that has been inflicted across much of southern Europe over the past few years. Well, we're in northern Europe. It's pretty degraded here. He's got a great name, isn't he? Mr. Tardio. Just call him Mr. Tardy. In addition, I am occasionally asked a second question about Mr. Tardio. Do I regret calling him an idiot live on air? In retrospect, I think I probably do. I wouldn't regret calling any of these people idiots to their face, on air or not on air. To call somebody an idiot is to imply that they are in some way mentally incapable and therefore not morally responsible for their actions. Well, none of these people are morally responsible because of no morals. I have received several assurances from interested parties that Mr. Tardio is an intelligent and well-educated man. It is therefore reasonable to assume that he understands precisely what he is doing and the terrible damage he is causing, yet carries on regardless. Well, that's because he's got no morals. Or empathy for the damage he's causing. Let's bear in mind that Ollie Rehn, to whom Mr Tardio reports, is the Commissioner responsible for handling the Eurozone crisis, and therefore the European Union's financial enforcer, Mr Rehn, has made a number of dreadful errors, many of them chronicled by my brilliant colleague Ambrose Evan Pritchard. They border on economic sadism, or even go beyond it. Yeah, sadism is a good word. What's beyond sadism, I wonder? Murder? The fundamental mistake for which Mr Wren ought to take responsibility was the perverse decision to force the countries of Southern Europe to pay the price for errors made mainly by Northern European bankers. In all conscience, Mr Wren ought to have resigned, or at least given an apology for letting off the banks while inflicting devastation on Southern Europe. What good's an apology when there's people begging on the streets because of nothing to eat? It is, of course, unfair to blame Mr Wren for everything that's happened. I don't think so. Nevertheless, in ordinary democratic politics, he would have carried the can long ago. But, of course, we don't have any democracy, do we? I remember the odium that was poured on Norman Lamont after he declared as Chancellor that unemployment and recession were a price well worth paying for curbing inflation. Mr Wren clearly thinks along similar lines and has implemented his policy in a far more brutal way. He has interpreted his role as imposing from above on European governments identical policies of economic austerity, regardless of whom the voters of those countries have chosen to put in office. Well, who gives the European Union the right to tell us what to do? We didn't. But these lackey bought and paid for scumbag politicians that people for some reason still go out and vote for, regardless of how many lies they tell, have sold them all down the river, and they'll go out next year and vote for them again. As Philip Legrain, a former economic advisor to the Commission's President Jose Manuel Barroso, noted this week in the New York Times, that a remote, unelected and scarcely accountable official in Brussels should deny voters legitimate choices about tax and spending decisions is undemocratic and alienates people from the European Union. Well, Jose Manuel Barroso is a hardline communist, so it shouldn't come as any surprise that he's unaccountable and undemocratic, should it, really? Mr Legrain labelled Mr Wren's policy fiscal colonialism. Certainly its consequences have been grotesque. The European Commissioner for Economic and Monetary Affairs is subjecting the peoples of Europe to a vicious social and economic experiment, which has failed, obviously, from our point of view, but from theirs it's probably working absolutely to plan. Parts of Europe have suffered a depression worse than that of the 30s. Entire economies have been wiped out before our eyes, and the life chances of tens of millions of young people obliterated. Well, don't worry about it in Britain, because the National Service Bill's coming along and they'll just scoop them all off the streets and send them off to whatever godforsaken bomb site they decide to have them murdered at. It continues to puzzle me why left-wing commentators such as the Observer's Will Hutton, who were so incensed by Margaret Thatcher's economic policies in the 80s, have little or nothing to say about this. The so-called Thatcher cuts were a pinprick by comparison. Well, I left school when Thatcher came to power. I left school the month after she came to power. And I tell you, the first 10 years of my life up in Scotland were pretty brutal. But having said that, what's going on in Spain, Greece, and other parts of Europe, Portugal, and here, it's far, far worse than I ever remember it. And people keep telling us we're lucky. You know, we've never had it so good. Nonsense, eh? This brings me to the European elections that are to be held next month. In theory, they could mark a historic moment of social and political upheaval as the subject voters of Europe challenge the political colonialism of the centre. In other words, they're trying to push people to extremes here to vote for UKIP or the BNP or whoever, whatever far right or far left, if you believe in that kind of nonsense, party that comes out. What I think they're trying to do is set people up to listen. That's just the same as they did in Germany, and they'll have the European countries start arguing amongst themselves. Well, only the leaders, of course, because the people don't get any choice in it. All the people, as far as I'm aware, get on. I've never had any trouble with anybody in Europe, Eastern or Western, or Indian or Turkish or wherever I've been. It's just the ones at the top that cause all the trouble, and the ones at the bottom that pay for it in their lives normally. Okay, and there are scattered signs at national. There you go. Signs. I should say that I don't ever read these out. I don't ever read through these before I go on air. So you know, whatever it says, just my own comments, and if it happens to ring true later on in the articles, well, there you go. I'll probably be wrong for the next half half of the, the articles we've got here, but never mind. Okay, and there are scattered signs that nationalist parties determined to smash the EU system may indeed achieve some substantial successes. In France, Marine Le Pen could lead the National Front to first place in the polls. The situation in Greece is indecipherable. Here in Britain, where we have a far stronger democratic tradition than other European countries, Nigel Farage has emerged as a brilliant leader of the insurgent UKIP and may well get more votes than the Conservatives. What a strange use of words, say. What's insurgent? He's an insurgent. Well, they usually label terrorists insurgents. Elsewhere, the political analysts run into difficulty. In defiance of logic, the expected anti-European revolt is simply not happening. Take the example of Spain, which has suffered terribly during the past 5 years and where youth unemployment is more than 50%. Can you imagine 50% unemployment among young people in this country? It's coming, and that's why we've got a national service bill coming. One would expect a revolution, and yet there are no anti-European parties that are worthy of the name. Exactly the same applies in Portugal, which has suffered almost as badly during the Eurozone crisis. Well, a revolution is just a circle. It brings you right back to where you started. So, people who think a revolution is somehow going to change anything, you're sadly mistaken. That's the Russell Brand logic, if he has any logic in his head. I watched a little video of him earlier, which he has in The Guardian, I think it is. What a twat. A paradox is at work. It was only towards the end of last century that Spain and Portugal emerged from dictatorships, while the former Iron Curtain countries have emerged from communist rule even more recently. For them, the European Union represents a deeply cherished respectability. These countries seem happy to exchange the formal apparatus of dictatorship for the European Union's emerging anti-democratic system. Well, I tell you what, I've spoken to, there's people that listen to this regularly. I spend a bit of time in Bulgaria, and most Bulgarians I speak to would be quite happy to go back to the Soviet Union after their brief experience of the European Union. Over there now in all the cities, they've started putting the lines in the road where you can't parking meters coming in, all of it, the whole lot. And they're even starting to roll out CCTV cameras on the main roads. And I tell you what, the young people over there won't take it. And they're not taking it. They started ripping them down already, and quite rightly so. And maybe if our young people employ themselves in a likewise fashion, we might actually get somewhere. The EU has always been at heart an elite project. Of course, it has been defined by rule from above, made deliberately unintelligible to the average citizen. Well, it was deliberately made unintelligible, and I think it was, his name escapes me at the moment, admitted that when they wrote the Lisbon Treaty, they had to write it unintelligibly so nobody could understand it, not even them. And I wonder what they mean by the average citizen, because none of us are citizens, and none of us are average. It's first that architects is an interesting word as well, isn't it? Very Masonic. Having lived through the fascism of the 30s and the horrors of Second World War, indeed had excellent reasons for distrusting democracy and the popular will. But I think they ignored it, never mind distrusting it. This helps to explain the most unlikely feature of the European system, the absence of opposition. Well, how can you oppose the European Union en masse? The only way you can do it is stop paying them and nobody vote for them. Simple as that. And see what they do next. You'll probably find a load of blue helmets on the streets of Britain coming to get their money. Next month's elections will see a surge of support for anti-European parties, but for the most part they articulate national concerns and do not walk together. Mr Farage's UKIP, for example, will have nothing to do with Marine Le Pen's National Front. There is no common anti-European agenda, which is an important reason why the established parties will continue to dominate the European Parliament after next month's elections, and Nigel Farage will still take his big fat paycheck and his pension. This is the environment in which skillful bureaucrats such as my friend Mr Tardio can rise to the top and stay there, but elites can only survive for so long as they are trusted. Well, they're surviving now and nobody trusts them. And the political class that governs Europe has made a spectacular mess. Next month's elections may not amount to a revolution, but we will certainly see the greatest rebellion yet against a politically bankrupt system, and a bankrupt European Union as well. Mr Tardio can be confident of a job at the start of June, but he would be unwise to count on making it to pension age. Something new and interesting is afoot. Well, they don't have to make it to pension age. They only have to do one term, and they get a pension for life, index-linked, and vastly above the rate of inflation anywhere. So, it's the same as the politicians in this country. One term in Parliament, pension for life, fat salary, and you don't have to wait till retirement age to get it either, unlike everybody else. Okay, the Express. European Union's leading institutions are vulnerable to corruption. New report finds that the European Union is possibly, just maybe, corrupt. Well, I think the average citizen has been well aware that the European has been corrupt from its inception. We don't need Express or experts to tell us that, do we? I wonder how much is spent on the report and who got a backhand over it. The European Union's leading institutions are vulnerable to corruption, a new report has found. Independent watchdog organisation Transparency International claims to have delivered the first comprehensive survey of how the European Commission, European Parliament and other European institutions are acting to ensure standards of integrity, transparency and accountability. None of them, is it? They're not applying any of that. Among its findings were a discovery that secret so-called trialogue meetings, where key details are written into EU legislations, are on the increase. That'll be secret meetings, I suppose. A total of 1,549 were held between 2009 and 2014, but there is no public record of who attended or what was agreed. There's democracy for you. It was also found that, alarmingly, just one of the 10 EU institutions surveyed has clear rules to protect whistleblowers. Well, whistleblowers just get shafted. We've got an article actually up on the Community Press Group site, which Dave wrote yesterday regarding police whistleblowers, which is worth a read. Maybe Alan will do it later. The 244-page document, which was made public today, revealed there are at least 15,000 lobbyists in Brussels, but no mandatory limits on the contacts or input they may have with EU officials. Well, every one of them should be in prison, because as far as I'm aware, it's still illegal to lobby politicians. And so should the politicians who are taking the money off these characters. The report details how official committees that monitor compliance with ethics rules often lack independence or real teeth, or ethics, or that. The watchdog also claims there is no evidence that the information European commissioners and members of the European Parliament are supposed to provide in order to safeguard against conflicts of interest or illicit enrichment is systematically checked. Well, they don't bother with illicit enrichment anymore. It's right out in the open. They're just corrupt. Transparency International took 9 months of research to produce the report on the EU's integrity system, which it said is grounded in a good set of general policies and rules. It's just that none of them obey them. One major EU institution, the European Parliament, refused to cooperate, the organisation said. Oh, surprise, surprise. Carl Dolan, one of the experts involved in the study, at least he had the good grace to name himself. The rule book is there to prevent corruption or conflicts of interest, but the rules are not enforced. Of course not. The European Parliament made the rules. There's an atmosphere of complacency in Brussels in the way, for example, that conflicts of interest are checked or sanctioned. It's often reduced to box ticking, where the declarations are not verified. There are no independent committees that oversee the rules. Important legislation is being agreed in secret meetings where there is no public record of what happened. European Commission spokesman Antonio Gravelli said the institution takes honesty and transparency in government very seriously. It just ignores it then. He said the risk of wrongdoing or of corruption and fraud can never be entirely eliminated, but the report clearly recognises that the Commission has taken a comprehensive set of measures intended to reduce this risk to a minimum, and that a strong framework is in place. But, yeah, it's just completely ignored, and I think there's a minimum amount of honesty, if any, from these characters. Tim Acker, from UKIP's Head of Policy Unit, said, "This shows how unaccountable the EU is." And there's his leader, Nigel Farage, contributing to a secret slush fund to give him a heavily subsidised pension from the taxpayer. What a crook. It costs us 55 million a day, writes our laws, and controls our borders. These findings now tell us it is open to corruption and give us another reason why we should leave the EU and take back control from Brussels. Well, that's obviously sponsored by UKIP, that article, I think. Right, we'll go to this article, Why the Public Can't Stand Today's Politicians, and then we'll go to a piece of music. They're indecisive, lacking real-world experience, afraid of speaking their minds, and devoid of colourful personal lives. No wonder we don't like politicians anymore, says Alex Proud. Now, the reason we don't like them is because they rub us blind, they kill our elderly people, they kill our children, they stick us full of vaccines, poison water, poison food. They cream taxpayers' money right into their bank accounts with lavish expenses, which just isn't enough for them. They cheat them as well. They get massive pensions. They get all their perks. Their second homes bought and paid for. And they screw everybody, quite literally at times. whatever, men, women, children, you name it, they do it. Snort a load of stuff up their nose, inject stuff in their arms, and we pay for it all. That's why we can't stand politicians. I grew up wanting to be a politician. It gets worse. Most of my heroes are politicians. What a sad man. But before you decide I'm some irredeemable weirdo, well, I've decided that from the first line. My heroes are politicians like Lloyd George and Gladstone, Churchill and Attlee, not Cameron, Osborne, Miliband and Clegg. It's funny, I just heard a thing on the radio this morning about Lloyd George, and there was I think she's a 92-year-old woman on Radio 4. I apologise for listening to Radio 4, but there is some trash on there that you just have to listen to and talk about. But yeah, Lloyd George used to pin her up against the wall when she was 16 and measure her height. What is that about? And Churchill, well, we know what Churchill was. He was one of the club. My heroes are the people who led us through the Industrial Revolution, faced down Nazism and built the NHS. They were the great leaders, and their wise, far-sighted decisions improved the lives of millions and continue to benefit us today. None of the class of 2010 measure up to these historical greats. In fact, they don't even measure up to more recent leaders. Well, they measured up this woman that was on the radio this morning. But now we have a desperately underpowered Prime Minister who does well if he scores a few cheap points at PMQs. Prime Minister's Question Time. A smirking schoolboy Chancellor and a leader of the opposition who, leaving aside his notable lack of policies, sounds like he should be comparing at a Star Trek convention. Yeah, beam me up, Scotty. The lack of quality in our political top tier is weird if you think about it, because politicians are actually very important to us. Well, they might be very important to you, mate, but I don't think anybody listening to this shares your optimism. From the financial crisis to the EU to the Ukraine, our daily lives are more affected by politics than they've been at any point since the mid-70s. Well, he's got that right. Moreover, we all have opinions about politics. Politics saturates our media, fills our Twitter feeds, and animates our pub discussions. Well, that's if you can find a pub open these days. Politics is like Big Brother for people who can read without moving the lips. Politics is like Big Brother. Yeah, trash. Politics is like Big Brother in another important way too. Many of us have nothing but contempt for those inside the house. Well, if you're stupid enough to watch it, I've got contempt for you. We hate politicians, the press and TV hate politicians, bloggers hate them and comedians hate them. It's not tribal anymore either. Right-wing papers gleefully trash the Tories and the left-wing commentariat. The interesting now they're using kind of Soviet-sounding words these days. Thinks nothing of ripping Labour a new one. In fact, there's a remarkable political consensus about the uselessness of our politicians. We might not agree on much else, but we can all agree that they're lazy, overpaid, corrupt, self-interested and inept. Well, yeah, 5 out of 5 ain't bad, is it? Normally, this is where I'd say everyone is wrong and launch into a contrarian argument that combines breathtaking subtlety with Wagnerian power. But actually, I think the consensus is half right. On the credit side, I don't believe our MPs are lazy. Excuse me. Especially corrupt or overpaid. What planet is this guy on? However, the view that they're cowardly, inept, self-interested and deeply weird is pretty much on the money. With cosy Western capitalism facing a kind of drawn-out existential crisis, they are not the men and women for the job. And because they're not up to the task, we hate them. And I've already explained why we hate them. But why is this? Why can't we have good politicians? Why can't we have another Pitt, or another Churchill, or another Thatcher, or even another Blair? So Blair and Thatcher were good politicians. No, they're just good crooks. I'll start shallow, with the position that most politicians are weirdos. It's often said that politics is show business for ugly people, but I take it one further, because some ugly people are charming and talented. Politics is like show business for total freaks. The kind of people you try and avoid if you met them on holiday. Who can forget the bright 70s jacketed 16-year-old Haig speaking to the Conservative Party conference? As a normal 16-year-old, would you want to hang out with someone who read Hansard? No, you'd want to hang out with people who are interested in sleeping with girls and underage drinking, and rightly so. Well, William Hague hung about with Jimmy Savile. So, say no more. At university, this weirdness is even more evident. Our current top-tier Poles were rarely normal students. They were the odd spods who hung about the Student Union, Labour and Conservative Association dorks. When the rest of us were attending raves and discovering the then novel drug ecstasy, speak for yourself, mate, they were handing out flyers or tying them up in knots. passing pointless motions against oppressive regimes. Incidentally, if you wonder why so many of them dress so badly, it's because they were the ones who wore ties to lectures in 1990. I don't know how they dress so badly. They've got all that money to spend on expensive suits. Post-university, they followed a well-trodden path to being an MP's gopher and generally making a nuisance of themselves long enough to stand in a winnable seat. Well, now they're just bankers' gophers, aren't they? By the time they became MPs at, say, 32, they hadn't spent a day outside politics since they were 18. They can't relate to normal people because they've never been normal people. They only have other politicians as a reference point. This guy's making excuses for them being pathological liars and psychopathic. They're the human equivalent of a Quentin Tarantino film. Yeah, he had a lot of psychopaths in his movies as well. All reference to other films without the redeeming glamorization of drug use and violence. Well, I think they're pretty well versed on drug use and a bit of violence as well. I suppose you could argue that by these low standards, our Prime Minister is actually quite well rounded, rounded round a gut with all these 5-star dinners, having spent 6.5 years in a PR job that he got through family connections, and by all accounts wasn't terribly good at. He's still not good at anything, is he? In a terribly meritocratic system, God only knows what he'd be. A bin man, or something lower than a bin man, probably just the trash that the bin man sweeps up. That's all he's good for. Anyway, Cameron is unable to rate to anyone normal as is the rest of them. It's just that his blinkered existence is more about the Bullingdon Club and baronet's daughters than canvassing the world. This is the key to why people hate politicians. Most of them can't empathise with or relate to the people they represent. They are only interested in Westminster because it's all they know. Well, they don't represent anybody and they've no empathy. And it's interesting, he mentions the Bullingdon Club, but he doesn't actually tell you what it is. He doesn't tell you these cretins used to go around and destroy restaurants and bars and everything and just throw money at the landlord and tell them to shut up. It's also why none of them are like the old-fashioned leaders we remember. That includes Cameron, Osborne, Boris Johnson and the like. They were all like that. And throwing cocaine up their nose in large amounts. This is a world where you can never say it as it is. You never use common sense and you hedge everything just in case the weak position you've half committed yourself to proves somewhat unpopular. They fret about focus groups, about what people think about where they holiday and whether some stupid incident back in 1993 will return to haunt them. Well, that's probably like Osborne with the prostitute and the cocaine, which is well publicised in the mainstream media, and he's there deciding the finances of the country. What a joke. They want to appear strong and decisive, but they're terrified of their own shadows. The big issues of the day, the NHS, Europe, education, are fudged. One of the reasons people like Nigel Farage is because at least he sometimes takes clear position. Yeah, at the European Parliament, raking in the cash. That's his clear position. If they had some experience of normal life, it might be different. For starters, they'd be happier saying yes or no, because that's what managers and bosses do. The private sector's not perfect, but its leaders, and let's not forget some multinationals aren't far off being nation states these days, are pretty good at saying, we'll close down X to save money. Well, a lot of multinationals have a lot more money than nation states, and as to nation states, they don't exist anymore in Europe. A lack of real-world experience points to another key reason politicians are terrified about upsetting anyone. As if. It's because they think they'll lose their jobs at the next election. But if they spent a bit more time in the real world, they'd know that losing your job isn't the end of the world, and, what's more, they'd have another career to fall back on. Yeah, because somebody'd give them a job. And that's exactly what happened to Tony Blair right after his exit from Downing Street, which I'm sure was well planned and well orchestrated. And now he's a multi-millionaire for doing a great job of screwing up the country. Of course, and the same goes for Gordon Brown. Of course, a lack of real-world experience isn't the only reason our leaders, in inverted commas, are such moral cowards. Well, they've no morals. They have the press to contend with, and I'll happily agree that our newspapers, most notably and viciously the Mail, often treat politicians with a hypocrisy so monumental that it is one of the 7 abstract wonders of the world. But that our politicians hang on those papers, every word shows how behind the curve they are. Well, I can tell you the community press group's going to be starting to get in the faces of some of these cretins all through the summer, and we'll see what comes of that. Newspaper circulations are a shadow of what they were, and their influence is greatly diluted by thousands of online outlets and social media. In the private sector, many large companies, PR departments now treat journalists with a disdain that would have been unimaginable 15 years ago, preferring instead to go directly to the public via Facebook and Twitter. Well, that's because journalists aren't journalists anymore, they're just lackeys and pen pushers. They don't go out hunting down stories. They just cut and paste from each other. It's all gossip and innuendo, especially the likes of the Mail, the Express, the Sun, all those trashy papers, and even the broadsheets that aren't much better. To me, Cameron's close relationship with the News of the World showed how out of touch he was. No, he likes sleaze. Cameron's sleazy, so he went to a sleazy paper. It was a bit like watching a Commonwealth leader deferring to Britain as a great global power in the mid-70s. Of course, we have to shoulder our share of the blame too. Our gutter press may be losing its influence, but its legacy lives on in our demanding real leaders on one hand and asking for someone with no flaws who you could take home to meet Granny on the other. It's pretty unlikely that Churchill, arguably the world's highest functioning drunk, would have made it to the top these days. Ditto Lloyd George, who had so many notches on his bedpost that it probably resembled a toothpick. So perhaps we should recognise that. Yeah, and I mentioned George Lloyd measuring up 15, 16-year-old girls, possibly up against the bedpost. Who knows? Right, we'll go to a piece of music and then we'll come back with Mr. Blair. Welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio at 20 to 9 on the. It is the 23rd, isn't it? 23rd of April, 2014. Apologies for being a bit disorganised tonight, but accidents on the motorways and I can't get home, so I'm stuck in the office and most of my news stories were at home. So I've had to kind of rake the internet and try and find something else. But there you go. Okay, The Guardian, 23rd April. Blair's speech on Islamic extremism generates strong reactions. International commentary focuses on former Prime Minister's credibility on the subject as much as the subject itself. What a hypocrite. This is the guy who was made a Middle East peace envoy after blowing the hell out of Iraq and Afghanistan. Tony Blair's speech seeking to rally global support for confrontation with Islamic extremism generated a storm of reaction, most of it negative and much of it focusing on the messenger rather than the message, and rightly so, because he's a war criminal. The director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding, Chris Doyle, said, that's a really Arabic name, isn't it? Said the former Prime Minister had been right to underline the importance of this subject in his Bloomberg speech, but was sharply critical of the way he went about tackling it. Doyle said Blair is largely right to highlight the issue. Islamic extremism is not on the wane. It is flourishing in many areas of the world. Nobody should be complacent. Well, why is it flourishing? I think if Iraqis invaded Britain, I think British fundamentalism would be on the rise as well if they were bombing our homes. But they're not, of course. So why are we bombing theirs? And it's his solutions that are very problematic, particularly the idea that people in the Middle East have to choose between dictatorship and Islamic extremism. And in criticising the Muslim Brotherhood, he has endorsed the military leadership in Egypt. But the choice the people of the region need is not between dictatorship and extremism, but between those systems and pluralist democratic rule. In fact, dictatorships have often been a significant cause of frustration and anger and a driving force behind the rise of Al-Qaeda. Well, Egypt voted in a democratic election for the Muslim Brotherhood, and Tony Blair is now saying that that's invalid because they have to have the army in there as a dictatorship. So when they talk about democracy, it's only democracy when it suits them, and dictatorship when it doesn't. And basically, we've got dictatorship in Britain, as has America. Blair found support of his position from a former Foreign Office Minister, Dennis McShane, who said he had warned about the threat of Islamism in 2003 and was nearly sacked for his stand. He compared Wednesday's speech to Winston Churchill's famous 1946 warning about the descent of the Iron Curtain. McShane tweeted, just read Blair's speech, ignore headlines. This is Fulton Mark II. Bien pensant left then refused to challenge Stalinism. Orwell knew better. Yeah, Orwell did know better, but so why are we living in 1984? Others complained that the speech conflated different strands in political Islam. The Palestinian editor of the Rai al-Yun news website, Abdul Bari Atwan, said Blair is implying that extremist Islam is a danger for the whole world, but the target is the Muslim Brotherhood. He's a very good friend of Mr. Sisi in Egypt, and he does a lot of consultancy work in the region. For who? JP Morgan, perhaps? So it's not surprising that he's speaking out. He had spent years as peace envoy, but what kind of peace has he achieved? Well, he started a war. How's that peaceful? We have to differentiate between radical Islam and moderate Islam. If you criminalise Islamists like the Muslim Brotherhood, then you're pushing them into extremism. In much the way as the British Army did up in Northern Ireland and on Bloody Sunday. It was the best recruiting tool that the IRA ever got. and that was the purpose behind it, to keep the IRA going. Much of the commentary focused on Blair's own credibility on the subject as much as the subject itself, particularly his role in leading Britain into the war in Iraq alongside the former US President George W. Bush. Doyle said before 2003 there wasn't an issue of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. There is now. Intervention is highly risky and almost always leads to situations where extremists flourish. They profit from instability, civil war, and the inability of states to manage their territories. Well, you know, one man's extremist, another man's terrorist, isn't it? Or and the other way. One man's extremist or terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Look at what they did to Nelson Mandela, a man who was found guilty of throwing bombs into buses full of children. But he's a hero, you know. He's lucky he wasn't an Islamist. A columnist for the Saudi-owned Al Hayat Daily, Jihad Al-Khazen, said Blair and George W. Bush are as responsible for radical Islam as any of its leaders. The war in Iraq caused the death of almost 1 million Muslims. It gave a reason for every radical in the Middle East to go to war against the West. But that's just what I said. If they were over here bombing the hell out of us and killed 1 million people, I'm sure they'd be nuked by now. I don't think Blair will absolve himself of responsibility by making his speech. He talks about how the Middle East matters, but he says nothing about Israel's continuing occupation. Of course not, he's a good Zionist. He's definitely not the right person to be lecturing on this subject, or to be a peace envoy. That's an oxymoron. Well, it's more than that. It's utter hypocrisy. Daniel Siedemann, an Israeli lawyer and expert in Jerusalem, where Blair spent some of his year as envoy for the Quartet, also the UN, EU, US and Russia, also noted the absence of any mention of the occupation of Palestinian territory settlements and a prospect of a Palestinian state. Well, that's because he's got a nice apartment in Jerusalem, isn't it? Meanwhile, a columnist on the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, Ashol Pfeiffer, tweeted, "The fascinating thing about Blair's speech today is that it could have been a Netanyahu speech, word for word. They share the same outlook." Well, he's spot on, isn't he? Absolutely. Netanyahu's another fanatic. Okay, change and tack a little bit. Bedroom tax. Many people have been plunged into poverty with the bedroom tax, and I don't know many people in the US will have heard of this, but the bedroom tax was brought in if you had a spare bedroom in your house because your children had left home, they'd gone off to get their own job, or they'd gone off to university, and you had a spare room in your house, if it was a council house or housing association, you were taxed on having that spare room. But this is how the Welsh Housing Association compensates people. Bedroom tax. Housing Association offers free cream egg to tenants suffering financial hardship as a result of spare room subsidy. Again, for Americans who don't know what cream egg is, it's a little piece of chocolate with some fondant icing in the middle. A Welsh Housing Association has come under fire after offering residents a free cream egg to make up for the financial hardship they may have experienced under the bedroom tax. Valleys to Coast sent out the thank you letter along with the offer of a free cream egg a year after the spare room subsidy was introduced. They didn't even give them a cream egg, they offered them one. They had to go and claim it from somewhere. The controversial reform, dubbed the bedroom tax, cuts the benefits of social housing tenants with a spare room. Nearly 6 out of 7 affected households have been unable to avoid the cuts, as a chronic shortage of housing means that there are no smaller properties for them to move to. Campaigners said the move targets the most vulnerable in society, including carers and the disabled. There's got to be some legal case to be taken against these crooks. If they're going to tax you and they cannot offer you another house to move into, and you tell them you want to move, then surely they should be paying the bedroom tax. It's as simple as that. The letter to tenants reads, "Valleys to Coast Housing would like to thank you for your efforts to pay this shortfall. V2C understands this has been a challenging time and wants to recognise your payment efforts. We know that money is much tighter now with household bills such as food and fuel have increased year on year, and they keep telling us inflation is going down." It finishes by saying, "As well as thanking you by letter, we would like to offer you as a small thank you by offering a free cream egg should you call into the office during the month of April." So you've got to get a bus or something to the office to get a cream egg when you get one from round the corner of your local shop. Nigel Draper, who sent the letter, told the Independent, "The letter of thanks and small gesture of the cream egg is an important recognition to those tenants who have struggled to find additional rent due to the bedroom tax. Over the last 12 months, we have worked closely with our tenants to combat the worst effects of the bedroom tax." And what have they done? Nothing. Thrown most of them out. And they can't pay it. "We always need to engage and keep the debate alive, and the invitation to attend one of our regular walk-in sessions in Bridgend and pick up a free cream egg over Easter was a way of reminding tenants that even during the school holidays, staff are available to help with financial advice." What financial advice can you give to somebody when you've just slapped a tax on them and they've got no money anyway? pay up. That's the advice they give them. And here's your cream egg. Twitter users rounded on V2C after tenant Joe Halewood posted the letter. I know where I'd love to shove it, the cream egg, he wrote. Another said, this is possibly the most patronising thing I have ever heard. Is it one very expensive egg per bedroom, or doesn't it say? Last week, Oxfam said the government's welfare cap and bedroom tax were to blame for making almost 1.75 million of Britain's poorest families even poorer by a perfect storm of coalition benefit cuts. Well, that's the policy, isn't it? And isn't it disgusting to see Oxfam having to come out with statements about Britain? We're supposed to be one of the richest countries in the world. Here we have a charity, mainly, well, I say charity, but I'm sure they're raking in a lot of cash, and the chief executives are getting paid a hell of a lot of money, with very little actually going to the people that need it. Here's a charity that's most well known for trying to supposedly feed starving children in Africa, and they're having to deal with people in Britain. Anyway, The Guardian, and then we'll go to another piece of music because I'm going to run out of stories otherwise. Anyway, crime rate in England and Wales falls 15% to its lowest level in 33 years. Does anybody believe that? Really? The fall is one of the biggest in history of crime survey of England and Wales, and is driven by a 22% fall in violent crime. I'd say that's probably 22% not been reported or been reclassified. The crime rate in England and Wales has fallen by an unexpected 15% to an estimated 7.5 million offences, its lowest level since the official survey began 33 years ago. Well, if it's an official survey, you can guarantee the figures are rigged. And we discussed that last week with the falsification of crime figures, and the chief inspectors and people of that rank well up there getting very, very substantial bonuses year on year based on these false figures. And we've got FOIs out to every police constabulary asking how much these people were paid on the basis of false figures, and we're going to take somebody to court on it, I think. The fall is one of the biggest in history of the authoritative crime survey of England and Wales, and was driven by a 22% fall in violent crime, a 25% fall in some types of household theft, a 15% fall in vandalism, and a 10% fall in car crime. All rigged figures, I'm sure. The murder rate in England and Wales also showed a slight fall in 2013, down to 551, and is now clearly 50% below the 2001 to 2002 peak of 1,047, which included many of the victims of Harold Shipman. Well, I bet you if they went back 50 years, that 551 figure would be, well, I don't know what it'd be. Maybe we should check. I guarantee it'll be a tenth that. So what's changed? The claim that England and Wales are now much safer than 20 years ago is reinforced by figures showing that even antisocial behaviour fell by 7% last year, extending a 6-year deadline. Now, bear in mind, there's no police on the streets, and so how are they collating antisocial behaviour figures when there's no police there to turn up and investigate them? The Office for National Statistics said the 15% fall in the overall rate meant that crime had fallen by 25% since 2007 to 2008, and by 60% since its peak level in 1995. The second official measure of crime, the contested police-recorded crime figures, which have lost their national statistics status because they're all bogus, showed a much smaller annual fall of 2% to 3.7 million offences. Now here they've twisted it to say that figure's smaller because the figures aren't right. Well, it's the other way around. The figures are far higher than they're telling you. Statisticians said this was possibly the result of a renewed focus on the quality of crime recording by the police following the political controversy over their integrity. The falsehood. However, the police recorded crime figures reveal a continued upward pressure in specific crimes thought to be related to economic hardship, particularly shoplifting, which rose by 6% across England and Wales last year. But this masked a growing north-south pattern, with the underlying figures showing rises in shoplifting of 20% in West Midlands, 19% in Nottinghamshire, and 16% on Merseyside. Increases in shoplifting were recorded in 34 out of the 43 police force areas. Police figures also show the first fall for 2 years in smartphone and street thefts, with the category of thefts from the person, which includes pickpocketing, falling by 2% last year. The detailed police recorded crime figures also report a 17% rise in sexual offences, including a 20% rise in rape to 214, the highest level for a decade. Well, that's not surprising, is it? I mean, the sex and violence that's on the telly and the computer games. And, monkey see, monkey do. The large rise in rapes and other sexual offences was partly due to increases in offences involving children, according to statisticians. Children getting raped, yeah. The police figures record 13,090 sexual offences involving a child under the age of 13 in 2013, the highest reported total for a decade and an increase of 32% on the previous 12 months. They include a 54% increase in rapes and sexual assaults on boys under 13, which rose from 1,775 to 2,727 last year. The number of sexual attacks on girls under 13 rose by 25% to 7,611 last year. Statisticians said that the rises reflected similar recent figures from the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, which attributed some of this increase to the impact of the Jimmy Savile case. Well, how can the Jimmy Savile case impact the amount of people who have been abused? He's dead. They said that media coverage of Savile and the police investigation into historical sex crimes Operation U-Tree had prompted victims to come forward. Rubbish. If anything, the cases that came after that have dissuaded people from coming forward because people aren't being found guilty, are they? Despite any amount of evidence, it seems. The 2013 crime figures are the first full year data after the Savile disclosures, and the U-Tree effect is starting to decline, statisticians say. While allegations relating to current offences rather than historical allegations accounted for only 21% of the increase in the crime figures 6 months ago, they now account for 50% of the increase in this latest set. The detailed crime figures also show a 25% rise in fraud to 2,252 recorded by Action Fraud. A new central organisation which has taken over the recording of fraud in all police force areas. I wonder how much they get paid for that. Another quang way. Much of it is online fraud data for which was not being captured by individual police forces before. But the overall pictures show a 15% fall in crime across nearly all other categories. But the most serious ones are way up. But the other categories are people stealing cars and stuff like that is down. That's okay then, isn't it? Retail figures show not only a continued decline in the murder rate, but robberies down 12%, gun crime down 6%, and knife crime down 4%. Household burglaries, once the main crime concern in the 1980s and 1990s, show a further 4% fall on the crime survey. But again, we're talking about 25% increase in the amount of attacks on girls under 13 and a 54% increase in the rapes and sexual assaults on boys under 13. But it's okay, burglaries are down. Drug offences were also down by 5%, but 171,000 people are still being penalised for possession of drugs, mainly cannabis. There is no consensus among criminologists about the key factors driving the sustained fall in crime. Earlier this week, Cardiff University researchers highlighted a decline in binge drinking and rising alcohol prices as a factor, but competing theories include links to the state of the economy and the removal of lead in petrol. They'll blame anything but the state of the society that we live in. Statisticians said that the difference between the 15% fall estimated by the survey and a much smaller 2% fall on the police recorded figures partly reflected the renewed focus on improving their quality. They pointed to rises in recorded violent crimes of 26% in Gwent and 25% in Kent, the two forces where the controversy over fiddled figures was most intense, as evidence of a correction in recording methods taking place. Norman Baker, the Crime Prevention Minister, said the figures showed clear evidence that the government's programme of police reform was working, to make crime worse. He said the government has a strong record on reinforcing the independence and accountability of the statistics. Why are ACPO making policy, and why are ACPO getting massive payouts, and why are ACPO running the driver rehabilitation schemes with their wives on the directorships and all the rest of it, of the consultancy firms that do the training for them? We asked Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary last June to carry out an audit of the quality of crime recording in every police force, and the Home Secretary has written to Chief Constables emphasising that the police must ensure that crimes are recorded accurately and honestly. But John Collins of the Police Foundation said the government should be wary of resting on its laurels. Well, that'll be the laurels they put round their heads as they view themselves as Roman emperors, I guess. While some crimes, such as burglary and car crime, are clearly not the problem they once were, it's possible that the official crime figures are just not picking up the extent to which new opportunities for crime have emerged, particularly online, he said. He added significant increases in levels of fraud, while likely to be at least in part a product of changes in reporting and recording practice, are of particular concern within the context in welcoming falling crime rates, it's important not to be blind to new and emerging challenges. Well, if he wants to find out, if he wants to investigate fraud, there's 650 people in Parliament he wants to have a look at first, and then move on to the European Union and start investigating those crooks in there who've not paid taxes, who are tax exempt, and voting themselves massive pay rises, just like our bunch of crooks over here. Right, go to another piece of music, and then we'll come back and talk about the disappearing mail. Excuse me, wasn't ready yet. Welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio. 9 o'clock on Thursday the 23rd of April. Now, there was a Canadian documentary out many years ago called The Disappearing Mail. I think it was on CBC. You can actually get it online. Just type in Disappearing Mail CBC and you'll get it. But it was all about how mails were basically becoming sterile. And this came from the Independent, I think it was today. End of men, not just yet, say scientists investigating mysteries of male Y chromosome. Reports of the demise of the male Y chromosome have been greatly exaggerated, according to scientists who believe that the end of men is a gender apocalypse too far. Two independent studies of the diminutive Y chromosome, which is inherited solely down the male line, have failed to find evidence to support the widely held theory that its evolutionary days and those of its owner are numbered. Well, maybe they're just trying to convince us that men aren't getting more weedy. I mean, I don't know if anybody's noticed, but you look at young guys nowadays, and there's nothing to them. They're all encouraged to have long hair, and they're skinny as rakes, no muscle on them, no shoulders, and they basically look like girls. Where are we going? A detailed genetic analysis of the Y chromosomes of a wide range of mammalian species, including humans, show that far from continuing to wither away unremittingly, it has remained remarkably stable for at least the past 25 million years. The research also found that the few remaining genes on the Y chromosome include some that perform vital regulatory control of other genes that are active throughout a man's body, making each of his cells distinctly and subtly different from those of a woman. Well, I should hope so. This would suggest that medical treatment should in future be tailored more towards a patient's gender, and that doctors may have more reason to treat men and women differently according to their sex, said Professor David Page, director of the Whitehead Institute for Biomedical Research in Cambridge, Massachusetts. There's a clear need to move beyond a unisex model of biomedical research, which means we need to move beyond a unisex model of our understanding and treatment of disease, said Professor Page, who led one of the research teams. Henrik Kaisman of the University of Lausanne, who led the other team, said that the findings explode the myth that the Y chromosome is primarily about the genes involved in male reproduction. Now it is clear that the Y chromosome is not specific to males, so to speak, but also important for functions throughout the body. Professor Chris Kaisman said men inherit both Y and an X chromosome, and women have two X chromosomes. However, scientists believe the Y chromosome is a withered remnant of the X chromosome from which it originally evolved. So we're all women, I suppose, deep down. Maybe that's why they keep telling us to get in touch with our feminine side, eh? Hundreds of millions of years ago, genetic decay ravaged the Y chromosome. How do they know that? It's just utter nonsense, isn't it? Leaving it with just 3% of its ancestral genes compared with 98% on the corresponding X chromosome of women. Now, they'll tell us that men didn't survive, that human beings didn't survive hundreds of millions of years ago. So where they get this information is just beyond me. Maybe it's from one of David Icke's lizard people or something. Who knows? This rapid loss of genetic function was widely seen as a portent of a premature demise for the Y chromosome and of the male sex in general. The Oxford geneticists were into eugenicists here. Professor Brian Sykes, for instance, estimated in 2003 that men have about 125,000 years left before they become extinct. There's nothing wrong, folks. We've only got 125,000 years left, but apparently we've been here for hundreds of millions of years. So I'd say we're on a pretty short timescale now. However, the latest studies, published side by side in the journal Nature, you can trust that one, demonstrate that although the Y chromosome has retained only 19 of the 600 genes it once shared with the X chromosome, it has lost only one of its genes in the past 25 million years. Again, how do they know that? And those that have remained continue to serve vital functions throughout the male body, and not just in his reproductive organs. This study tells us that not only is the Y chromosome here to stay, but that we need to take it seriously and not just in the reproductive tract. There are approximately a dozen genes conserved on the Y that are expressed in cells and tissue types throughout the body. These are genes involved in decoding and interpreting the entirety of the genome. This is an elite bunch of genes. There's an interesting turn of phrase, isn't it? An elite bunch of genes. Yeah. He said, Daniel Bellot, a research scientist at the Whitehead Institute, said that the few genes left on the Y chromosome must be incredibly important for male survival and showed just how streamlined the Y chromosome has become. Yeah, so they've discovered the Y chromosome must be incredibly important for the male survival. So I wonder what they're going to do with it. Do you think they're maybe going to try and get rid of it? Evolution is telling us these genes are really important for survival. They've been selected and purified over time. Purified. We think the Y chromosome is holding on to these last few genes to ensure male viability. The Y is sort of streamlined. It's a minimal second sex chromosome, he said. So, we're set for extinction, boys. Never mind, women can rule the planet and dig their own holes in the road, I suppose. Anyway, The Independent, 22nd of April. Section 28 style bans on promoting homosexuality on the rise in UK schools, teachers say. Well, good. Why should a sexual orientation be promoted in schools? Do they promote heterosexuality? No. Growing numbers of schools are introducing Section 28 style bans on promoting homosexuality in the classroom, delegates told the National Unions of Teachers annual conference in Brighton today. Well, of course, Brighton is the gay capital of Britain. Interesting that they picked there. The controversial clause introduced under the Thatcher government was repealed by Labour because it was widely seen as promoting anti-gay feelings in schools. What, just because it's not been taught in schools, it's deemed as anti-gay? Well, they're not, as I say, they're not teaching heterosexuality in schools, so I suppose that's anti-heterosexual feelings being generated. However, a motion before the conference said that at least 46 schools, including a number of academies, had words similar to the previous legislation in their school policies. Deborah Glynn from St Helens, Lancashire, cited research by the British Humanist Association to the conference, which she said showed that there are many schools bringing this wording back into the policies. That's because they're uncomfortable about it. It's not a teacher's job to promote sexuality. If you are of a particular sexual orientation, that is your business. And if you want to jump up in the classroom and start shouting about it, then, you deserve what you get. I mean, I cannot understand why thousands of gay, lesbian people, transvestites, transsexuals, you name it, whatever, feel that they can, that they want to walk down the high street on a particular Saturday afternoon with their arses hanging out their jeans and think that's perfectly okay, and expect people to line the streets waving at them. As I say, imagine if there was a heterosexual march, a heterosexual pride march in every city one Saturday afternoon. Do you think the politicians might just get the message? But of course, heterosexual people have no need to go out and say, I'm proud to be heterosexual, because it's private. And it should stay private. A lot of fundamentalist groups, mainly Christians, she said. She said she had worked in one academy which had done this, but which had subsequently withdrawn the words after negotiations. A number of schools cited in the BHA research did withdraw the wording after it was pointed out to them. They said they had severely inherited the words of previous agreements and not realised until it was pointed out to them what they had done. I'm sure they knew exactly what they were doing, and rightly so. A Department of Education spokesman said any suggestion of schools singling out homosexuality is unacceptable. Well, if they're singling it out to teach it, that's unacceptable as well. Last summer, the Department for Education launched an investigation into schools who were alleged to have this kind of policy. As a result, all schools with offending policies committed to withdraw or replace them. All schools can drop their own sex education policy, but they must ensure that they do not discriminate unfairly on grounds of sexual orientation. Our sex and relationship education guidance makes it clear that schools should not promote any sexual orientation. Exactly, they shouldn't promote any sexual orientation whatsoever. But that's diversity for you, isn't it? We've just all got to be diverse and accept anything. It's called moral relativity. Anything goes. Right, change in tack. Just a short one here, and then I think we'll go to another little piece of music if Paula's got something lined up. Independent, 23rd of April. We all know where this is going to go, and it's pretty self-explanatory, really. Teenager Dallas Archer tried to smuggle gun into prison inside her body. A teenager in the US state of Tennessee attempted to smuggle a loaded handgun into prison by concealing it inside her vagina, according to police. That was a shot in the darkie. 19-year-old Dallas Archer was arrested around 3:15 p.m. on 21st of April by police officers and taken to Kingsport Jail for driving with a suspended sentence. Officers found the gun when a female prison officer searched the teenager and noticed an unknown object in Archer's groin, according to a police report obtained by the Smoking Gun website. Archer was then searched by two female officers in the bathroom when they found the 4-inch weapon hidden inside her. The mini revolver, which was valued at $250, is thought to have been stolen from a staff member of a car sales room during a burglary. Archer has since been charged with possession of stolen property, illegal possession of a firearm, and introducing contraband into the jail. A court clerk says no attorney is listed for Archer. But there you go. There's the excuse to search you intimately. So, you know, that's where that's going. The body scanners, which idiots are going through in Gatwick Airport, which I refuse to go through, they do take you into a private room now. And I'm sure that's where this is going. So, if Paul is ready, we'll throw another tune on and we'll come back with renewable energy. Okay, welcome back to Reality Bytes Radio on the 23rd of April. Right, renewable energy. There's been a lot of talk the last few weeks that the Tories, if they got re-elected, wouldn't be given planning permission to any new ridiculous windmill schemes. But of course, you know, they've got so many in place already. And just a week after they announced that, the government announces 8 huge new renewable energy projects. The Energy Secretary Ed Davey has stepped up his battle against climate change after announcing plans for 8 giant renewable power projects that will deliver enough green electricity for 3 million homes. The new offshore wind and biomass generators will create about 8,500 new jobs and give a much-needed boost to Britain's energy security in the face of growing threats from Russia over gas supplies. Mr Davies said they will increase the UK's electricity supply by about 4% and will rely on subsidies that will add about 2% or £11 to their average annual electricity bill by 2020. Well, you know, that's a lie for a start. £11, really? Any time the electricity company puts a fraction on your electricity bill, there's VAT put on it at every stage of the process, and you get screwed. Simple as that. So here we have, there's something they're so confident about that they can produce all this electricity, they can sell it onto the national grid, but we, the taxpayers, still have to subsidise them. That tells you all you need to know. Mr Davey defended the cost, arguing that these kinds of low-carbon projects were essential to boost energy security and battle climate change. Well, they're not low-carbon, that's been proven. It takes more energy to make the frickin' things than it does to actually run them and produce electricity. And I didn't swear there. I used the Irish equivalent, which I picked up very well in my 12 years over there. I see the climate change debate as inextricably linked with energy security. If we can reduce our dependency on imported energy, it will make us both more secure, but also enable us to tackle climate change, he said. Well, there's no need for us to be dependent on imported energy. There's 300 years at least worth of coal under the ground. There's enough shale gas all over this country to supply us for another 300 or 400 years. So all this crap about windmills and solar panels is an irrelevance when you put that into the equation. And I did mention an article last week from Japan, which showed that they could extract shale gas using carbon dioxide by pumping it under the ground using exactly the same process as the Green Party will tell you is detrimental and causes earthquakes, and that is fracking. And yet this new process doesn't use water at all. It just uses CO2. So the Greens don't have an argument there, do they? If you had a prolonged crisis in Ukraine, which we will have because it's planned that way, and prolonged disruption to gas supplies in Europe, you would see a price impact. This is something we need to guard against, and one of the reasons why investing in low-carbon sources like offshore wind, biomass and nuclear makes great economic sense, Mr Davey added. Well, the only wind being produced is coming out of these cretins, and it's a lot hot air. Mr Davey insisted that onshore wind had a huge future. In Britain, despite Conservative Party moves to curb its development and the lack of such a project among the 8 new plants announced yesterday, he said, One of them was going to be an onshore wind farm, but the backers later pulled out and pointed that a huge number of other land-based wind farms were in development. The projects are the first to be approved by the government under a new subsidy scheme that guarantees the operators a fixed price for their electricity that cannot be changed by future governments. What a great deal, eh? What a great deal. Even if it doesn't work, they're going to get paid for it. The approved schemes include offshore wind farms at Liverpool Bay and off the Moray, Norfolk and Yorkshire coasts. They also include biomass burners at the Giant Tracks coal power plant complex in Selby and in Middlesbrough. Biomass plants run on organic matter such as wood, grass, rubbish and waste gases such as methane. And just remember what I was saying last week about burning bodies in crematoriums and aborted babies in hospital generators, all organic matter. So what do you think the biomass plants are going to be running on in the future, folks? A bid for a second burner at Drax was turned down, leading its owners to announce legal proceedings against the government. Anne Robinson, Director of Consumer Policy at comparison website uswitch.com, said, while delivering secure, clean energy is an important part of the government's energy market reforms, it is imperative that affordability and keeping household costs to a minimum remains at the heart of its policy. The word reform says all you need to know, really. They're going to reform your energy. Although 2%, in other words, take it off you. Although 2% over the next 6 years may not sound like a significant increase, well, that's because it isn't. With the average energy bill now an eye-watering $1,265 a year, many customers will be left feeling concerned by this announcement. Of course they will, because they've been guaranteed a price for the electricity. Whatever, they're not telling you what price that is. Normally, say you're buying a house and they give you a fixed mortgage, it's well above the rate. The interest rate at the time you take it out. So I guarantee you this price is well above the going rate in today's prices, and these guys are going to be guaranteed it for a specific time length, which it doesn't state what that time length is here. So in other words, it isn't going to go down in price, is it? It can only go one way. And of course the government rakes in VAT on that as well. Mr. Davey acknowledged that the 8 projects will increase the average electricity prices, but said the development should be seen in the context of the government's energy policies across the board. The net impact of these will leave household gas and electricity bills £166 lower than they would have been by 2020. Well, how does he work that out? He's just told us it's going up £11 a year. Mr. Davies said, even though rising wholesale gas prices are likely to ensure the bill is higher than it is today. Well, there's a total contradiction in terms. The bills will be £166 lower, yet they'll be a lot higher than they are today. However, critics have questioned the £166 saving estimate, pointing out that it relies on households spending thousands of pounds on subsidised energy efficiency measures such as loft insulation and solar panels, which don't work. So they've got to spend all that money before they save any money. How many years is that going to take you? What a con. I wonder how many government ministers have got shares in the windmills. The Guardian, 22nd of April. UK e-borders programme unable to help track immigration. Now, I wouldn't have thought this is rocket science. You have passports, they get scanned at the airport, it'll tell you where you come from, it'll tell the border authorities where you come from, and it'll tell them when you leave. But they just can't seem to do a simple arithmetical sum. But they spent £500 million introducing this scheme, apparently. Ministers admit £500 million scheme, which took 10 years to develop, cannot replace existing methods of estimating net migration. Why do they have to estimate it when they've got an exact figure of how many people have come and gone? Unless, of course, they're discounting illegal immigration, of which there isn't that much. You've got to get in with some kind of passport, or some identity card. The Home Office's £500 million e-borders programme, which is designed to check everybody coming in and out of Britain, has taken more than 10 years to develop, cannot be used to estimate immigration, ministers have admitted. So who's responsible for the £500 million that's been just flushed down the toilet? They told MPs on the Public Administration Select Committee that data from the programme cannot be used to replace existing methods of estimating net migration to Britain because it does not collect information about whether passengers are long-term migrants or just visitors or tourists. Of course it does. They come in, they're still here, or they leave, and they've gone. It's simple. In fact, the Home Office has said it would be illegal under European Union legislation on free movement to routinely ask passengers how long they intend to stay or their purpose in entering the UK. Well, they ask me. They ask me sometimes when I'm going, where are you going?
Yeah, I'm getting on a plane, going to a specific location, and they know where I'm going, but they still ask. So I suppose the next time they ask me, I'll say, well, that's against European legislation, and see what happens to me. The disclosure that the programme, which has cost at least $500 million, cannot be used to provide a proper count of migration, came in an official response to a PAC report that had said that the existing method of estimating net migration based on the International Passenger Survey was not fit for purpose. The MPs recommended that ministers should no longer base their key immigration target of getting net migration below 100,000 by next year's election on such an uncertain statistic. It's much like the police statistics, really, isn't it? All bogus. Home Office ministers rejected the MP's claim that the IPS, in which more than 700,000 passengers a year are interviewed, was inadequate for measuring, managing and understanding migration levels. Well, they don't have to interview anybody. As I say, they check your passport in, they check your passport out. It's simple. In their official response published on Tuesday, ministers said they didn't agree and cited the UK Statistics Authority in supporting their view that the IPS remained as reliable and accurate as possible and was currently the best available estimate of net migration. Well, as reliable and accurate as possible doesn't tell you anything. They could be absolutely dreadful, but that's how accurate and reliable they can be as possible. The official reassurance follows the disclosure earlier this month by the Office for National Statistics, well, them again, that net migration, the number of people coming to live in the UK for more than 12 months, minus those going to live abroad for more than 12 months, had been underestimated by 346,000 between 2001 and 2011. The ONS said improvements to the IPS since 2009 had dealt with the problem. MPs on the PAC had told the Home Office that they were so unimpressed by the estimates based on the survey that the ONS and the Home Office should move as quickly as possible to start using e-borders data to measure immigration, emigration and net migration. But the Home Office said the Borders System Programme, as it is now called, under which passengers have to supply their name, nationality, gender, date of birth and passport details, could not be used to replicate the questions asked during the in-depth survey. Well, it's got your nationality, it's got your gender, it's got your date of birth and your name on your passport. So why did I have to ask you any questions? Partial questioning would not provide a reliable indication as to whether a person is a long-term migrant and would also be subject to challenge as disproportionate, the Home Office said. It should be noted that EU free movement legislation supported by historical European court judgment prevent border force officers from routinely asking additional questions, for example, on duration or purpose of intended stay. I'll have to bear that in mind, and anybody else that gets asked that question, threaten them with legal action, I think, of European Economic Association nationals beyond those necessary to establish nationality and identity, which of course they get from your passport, so that they don't have to ask you a single question after that. Minister said that while the border system data could not be used to directly estimate net migration, it would help to improve the figures as an additional source of information, and it only costs £500 million. What a bargain, eh? What a bargain. Okay, The Guardian, 22nd April. Why has Tesco suddenly changed nut allergy information on its products? Because, well, most peanuts in the world, I think, now are genetically modified. When did nut allergies start, all of a sudden? The last, 10, 15 years? Before that, you never heard of them. The supermarket giant has added warnings to a variety of unlikely foods from baked beans to pizza. Is the food different now, or is it just the labels? Well, the food is different now, isn't it? Well, these potatoes contain peanuts. What about this fruit juice? Preposterous questions maybe, but Claire Hussein is still asking herself them after she noticed that Tesco changed its may contain nuts advice on a raft of unlikely items. She has a daughter aged 3 with multiple allergies. And when did the multiple allergies start? When did people start getting all these allergies all of a sudden? These products literally change their allergy information overnight, she says. When you attempt a weekly shop for your family and find that everything from baked beans to pizza, butternut squash and more is suddenly labelled as potentially unsafe, it leaves you with extremely limited options for feeding your family. Well, they'll label it potentially unsafe because it is potentially unsafe, and they know it is, and they're just covering their backsides. Why are they selling it if it's potentially unsafe? Or why are they allowed to sell it if it's potentially unsafe? Hussein from Portsmouth has started a petition against the store's blanket labelling at change.org Tesco Nuts. It already has more than 13,000 signatures. Tesco is changing labelling to meet the requirement of EU legislation that comes into force in December. A spokesperson for the supermarket told us, "Our first priority is always the safety of our customers. We'll stop feeding them crap then." We also display these warnings on products where there is a risk of cross-contamination. Well, there shouldn't be a risk of cross-contamination. Food products should be on one production line, and that's it. They shouldn't be interchanged with other ones unless that equipment's been totally cleaned. And I learned that from my catering days. You don't cross-contaminate anything. It's against the law, and for good reason. To those with no experience of nut allergies, they may seem like a fabrication of a modern world that always needs something to worry about, but allergies can kill. 1 in 70 children was allergic to nuts in 2002, says Maureen Jenkins, Director of Clinical Services at Allergy UK, which is in discussion with Tesco over its labelling. The numbers have tripled in the last decade. How did that happen? And nobody's asking the question, how has it tripled in 12 years? To those with an allergy, nuts are difficult to avoid. There's peanuts everywhere, says Pam Ewan. Are there? Consultant allergist at Addenbrooke's Hospital, where a controlled study of peanut oral immunotherapy was published in The Lancet in January. Peanut eating is relatively recent. No, it's not. I think, well, I'm 50. We ate peanuts way back in Halloween and all the rest of it when I was a child. Someone who's 50 or 60 wouldn't have had nuts in their house. Well, there's a lie for a start. I did. They were luxury items. Now the peanut is very widely used. It's in people's homes on surfaces. If you took swabs from worktops or floors of households without allergies, you'd find peanut. Do you believe this stuff? Ewan has worked on allergies for 30 years. It was in the mid... I suppose like it's a House of Commons toilets, but, you will find cocaine there. Guaranteed. And they don't seem very allergic to that. They're sticking it up their nose every day of the week. It was in the mid-90s, she says. It must be good cocaine, I suppose. She says that she noticed people coming to her with nut allergies. 62 cases in a year, she says, the beginning of the uprise. Why is there an uprise? Nobody's asking the question. But our latest research has shown a potential option by desensitizing those with peanut allergies through exposing them to tiny daily amounts of peanut protein. At first this might mean 20 milligrams, but by 6 months exposure can reach 5 nuts a day. Over time the allergy is switched off. Ewan is not alone in exploring this cure. Similar approaches have been tried in the US, but Addenbrooke's work was a controlled study. Ewan's team hopes to open a clinic in Cambridge later this year, while the long process of applying for a licence for the treatment is underway. There's always money to be made, isn't there, out of sick people? None of which makes Hussein's job of shopping for her daughter any easier. She says he has yet to hear back from Tesco's on her queries. She wants to know whether the products themselves have changed or just the labels. However, she has noticed that some of the packaging of ham and high juice drinks has had the may contain nuts information removed. People say shop somewhere else, she says, but it's not as easy as that. I went into the greengrocer last week and they had nuts hanging in the doorway. For now, the Tesco herby potatoes and pre-packed butternut squash are still off the menu. It's just nuts, isn't it? Okay, the spread of debate is over syndrome. This comes from the Orange County Register. I think Orange County is in Florida. I think Paula can confirm that for me. The ongoing trial involving journalist Mark Stein, accused of defaming climate change theorist Michael Mann, reflects an increasingly dangerous tendency among our intellectual classes to embrace homogeneity of viewpoint. Stein, whose column has appeared for years on these pages, may be alternatingly entertaining or over-the-top obnoxious, but the slander lawsuit against him marks a milestone in what has become a dangerously authoritarian worldview being adopted in academia, the media, and large sections of the government bureaucracy. Let's call it the debate is over syndrome, referring to a term used most often in relationship with climate change, but also by President Barack Obama last week in reference to what remains the contentious and theoretically reformable healthcare plan. Ironically, his shift to certainty now comes increasingly from what passes for the left in America. These are the same people who historically have identified themselves with open-mindedness and the defence of free speech, while conservatives, with some justification, were associated more often with such traits as criminalising unpopular views, as seen in the 1950s McCarthy era, and embracing canonical bans on all sorts of personal behaviour, a tendency still more evident than necessary among some socially minded conservatives. Well, they're banning all sorts of personal behaviour now, aren't they? But when it comes to authoritarian expression of true beliefs, it's the progressive left that increasingly seeks to impose orthodoxy. In this rising intellectual order, those who dissent on everything from climate change, the causes of poverty, and the definition of marriage, to opposition to abortion are increasingly marginalised, and in some cases, as in the Stein trial, legally attacked. Well, the ones that dissent against climate change, causes of poverty, definition of marriage, and opposition to abortion are all talking from the same hymn sheet, because it's a totally dehumanising eugenics agenda, and it is totalitarian. So it's just normal human reaction that's now been criminalised. A few days ago, Brenda Ike, CEO of the web browser company Mozilla, resigned under pressure from gay rights groups. Why? Well, exactly why? She's an idiot. Because it was revealed Brendan Ike, because it was revealed he donated $1,000 to the campaign to pass Proposition 8, California's since overturned ballot measure defining marriage as between one man and one woman. Well, that's what it is. In many cases, I might agree with some leftist views, say on gay marriage or the critical nature of income inequality, but liberals should find these intolerant tendencies terrifying and dangerous in a democracy dependent on the free interchange of ideas. This shift has been building for decades and follows an increasingly uniform capture of key institutions, universities, the mass media and the bureaucracy by people holding a set of acceptable viewpoints. Ironically, the shift towards a uniform worldview started in the 1960s, in part as a reaction to the excesses of Senator Joseph McCarthy and the oppressive conformity of the 1950s. Why should we have a uniform view? We're human beings. We're entitled to have a view of our own as individuals. We're not part of a collective. But what started as liberation and openness has now engendered an ever more powerful clerisy, an educated class that seeks to impose particular viewpoints while marginalising and, in the most extreme cases, criminalising divergent views. Well, I've said it before and I'll say it again, that the Green Party and all those eco-freaks are the most intolerant bunch of people you're ever likely to meet on the planet. Yet they're the ones who push diversity and liberalism and, open marriage and all the rest of it, and, paedophilia, basically. Today's clerisy in some ways resembles the clerical First Estate in pre-revolutionary France, which, in the words of the historian Georges Lefebvre, possessed a control over thought in the interests of the church and king. With today's clerisy, notes essayist Joseph Bottom, social and political ideas are elevated to the status of strange divinities, born of the ancient religious hunger to perceive more in the world than just a give and take of ordinary human beings, but adapted to an age that piously congratulates itself on its escape from many of the strictures of ancient religion. To be sure, there remains a still potent camp of conservative ideologues, many associated with think tanks, such as the Heritage Foundation and a host of publications, most notably the media empire controlled by the Murdoch family. But for the most part, today's clerisy in media and academia tilts in one basic direction, embracing a fairly uniform set of secular truths on issues ranging from the nature of justice, race and gender to the environment. Those who dissent from the accepted point of view may not suffer excommunication, burning at the stake or other public rituals of penance. Well, not yet. But it's coming, folks. But can expect their work to be vilified or simply ignored. In some bastions of the new clerisy, such as San Francisco, an actress with unsuitable views can be pilloried and a campaign launched to remove her from a production for supporting a Tea Party candidate. Nowhere is a shift more evident than in academia, as evidenced in Mann's civil action against Stein. The climate change issue, one of great import and worthy of serious consideration, is now being buried by the seemingly unscientific notion that everyone needs to follow orthodoxy on an issue that, like the nature of God in the Middle Ages, is considered settled, and those who do not agree deserve to be pilloried and burned at the stake and hung, drawn and quartered, possibly. But climate change is just one manifestation of the new authoritarian view in academia. On many college campuses, speech codes have become an increasingly popular way to control thought at many campuses. Like medieval dons or academic worthies, concentrate their fire on those whose views, say on social issues, offend the new canon. No surprise then, as civil libertarian Nat Hentoff notes that a 2010 survey of 24,000 college students found that barely a third of them thought it safe to hold unpopular views on campus. Well, they're idiots. Where did they get the idea that the views were unpopular? I can tell you the Green movements on views are very popular. They barely get, I think it's 1% of the vote they got in the last election, with the British National Party, a bunch of fascists, got 1.9%. That's how popular the Green Party are. So I'd say their views are very, very unpopular. 100 of the population voted for them. That's it. This is not terribly surprising given the lack of intellectual diversity on many campuses. Various studies of political orientation of academies have found liberals outnumber conservatives from 8 to 1 to 14 to 1. Whether this is a reflection of simply natural preferences of the well-educated or partially blatant discrimination remains arguable, but some research suggests that roughly 2 of the 5 professors would be less inclined to hire an evangelical or conservative colleague than one more conventionally liberal. Political uniformity is certainly in vogue. A remarkable 96% of presidential campaign donations from the nation's Ivy League faculty and the staff in 2012 went to Obama, a margin more reminiscent of Soviet Russia than a properly functioning pluralistic academy. Well, I'm afraid America is living in the new Soviet Russia, and Soviet Russia, well, Russia as it stands now, is a lot more democratic than America or Britain or Europe will ever be. But they're the enemy. They're the enemy. They're the bad guys. Anyway, Italy, independent 23rd of April, and then we'll go to another tune after this one, Paula, if you like. Verona's Mayor Flavio Tosi, I think we'll call him, threatens fines for those who feed the homeless. Homeless people living in the centre of Verona are to be cleared out like pigeons after the city's right-wing mayor announced plans to introduce fines of €500 or £411 for those found feeding the homeless. Flavio Tosi, the first citizen of the pretty northern city forever associated with Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, said the rising numbers of vagrants in the central piazza was posing a risk to public health. Well, I tell you what, if there were vagrants, people wouldn't be feeding them. So basically, they're people who found themselves homeless and are hungry. And he blamed a local homeless charity for attracting them there with food handouts. Near to Piazza Dante, there's a garden where for some time the Ronda della Carita charity has been sending food parcels, said Mr. Tosi, a member of the rabble-rousing Northern League. Now there are 20 or more homeless sleeping there, and they use it like their own toilet. The situation has become unmanageable. We'll give them a house then. For this reason I've had to introduce this ban, the mayor said. He added that in Verona there were already loads of refuge centres, while those who choose to live rough were provoking an environmental health disaster. Well, a lot of people don't choose to live rough. It's just the circumstances they find themselves in, and they need help. A lot of them are probably suffering from mental health problems and being thrown out of somewhere. Marco Tesi, the president of Ronda della Carita, said the ban and the news of the fines had come like a bolt out of the blue. I don't know why they're surprised. It's the European Union they're dealing with. We didn't encourage the tramps, he said. We go where we're needed. If there are problems with hygiene and public order, you boost safeguards and increase controls. Finding those who bring them food is not the answer. The provincial president Giovanni Miozzi criticised the new policy. I understand the need for decorum and public order, but during a period like this, the priority must be to help people in difficulty. Well, it's coming up to the tourist season. They don't want they don't want the tourists seeing how filthy the conditions are that some people have to live in what was a rich country. But of course, it's so corrupt, like much of Europe is, that poor people are just left to fend for themselves. Francesca Bussinarolo, an MP for an anti-establishment five-star movement, decried the movement as an election ploy. This law has one function during an election campaign, to remind the electorate who Flavio Tosi is, the mayor sheriff, she told the Verona edition of Corriere della Sera. Mr. Tosi denied the law was cynical electioneering. My decree is not out of keeping with the Christian spirit. Besides, during the winter when there's an emergency cold snap, we welcome illegal immigrants too, he said. But just not in the summer, when the tourists are around, and I don't know what Christian spirit he's talking about, because it's pretty evil. But the mayor's reference to immigrants is likely to remind critics of the Northern League's attitude to minorities in general. A senior party member, Roberto Calderoli, last year compared the black minister Cecile Kyenge to an orangutan. Despite the uproar, he refused to resign his post as Deputy Speaker of the Senate. Other prominent Northern League officials, particularly in the party's northeast heartland around Verona, have at times appeared to be in competition with each other to see who can make the most offensive comments about gays or ethnic minorities. The party's reputation as a refuge for bigoted goons has reinforced this year, when the Northern League MP Gianluca Buonanno blacked up in Parliament to accuse Minister Kyenge of using her then position as Integration Minister to favour negritude. Nice people, eh? Right, I think we'll go to another piece of music and then we'll finish off with a few short pieces up to 10 o'clock. Okay, welcome back to the last 10 minutes or so of Reality Bytes Radio on the 23rd of April. Okay, just a couple of short articles to read, and possibly finish off with another piece of music, I think, because I've none left after this. Okay, They discussed this last week in one of the papers about people getting tested to see how long they lived. They're still pushing this stuff this week. This was today in the Telegraph. Will your pension pot last as long as you will? The government is to include your life expectancy in pensions guidance, whatever that means. What's the government got to do with your pension? You know, you're supposed to get it when you retire for the rest of your life. That's the state pension, that is, and that's the only one the government have got any say in. So why are they getting involved in your life expectancy? We preempt that and explain how to make your money see you through. This is a Telegraph giving you advice on how to live in poverty, I suppose. Just how long will your pension pot have to last? Or to put the same question another way, when do you expect to die? And it's a well-known fact that if you tell somebody they've only got 10 years to live, they'll be dead within that 10 years. If you tell them they've got 20, they'll last 20. So that's where this is going. They're going to make people die younger, so they don't get a pension at all. Individual life expectancy is one of the pieces of information which, according to the Pensions Minister, Steve Webb, all savers should be given at the point of retirement as part of new guidance planned by the government. Oh, they're so nice, aren't they? They're so benevolent, this government. They just want to tell you when you're going to die. The guidance is promised alongside radical pension changes announced in last month's budget, which will enable savers to access their pension fund whenever they want, once they've reached 55. They could eke it out with caution or blow it in one show, but the sum at stake and an idea of how long it might have to last are both crucial to any planning. More mortality statistics are crunched now than ever before, giving increasingly detailed snapshots of average likely lifespans. A man aged 65 from Harrow in North London, then you've got 20 years and 10 months to go. I doubt it. The data below draws from longevity figures just published by the Office for National Statistics. The figures show the number of years someone aged 65 could expect on average to live. You would potentially have a table with gender, where you live, and you could then say, this is the number on the chart for you, says Mr. Webb. You could also walk out in front of a bus the day after, which makes it totally irrelevant, or you could get ill with something you never had before, or any other amount of factors which no amount of statistics are ever going to anticipate. It's almost like the global warming climate models, isn't it? Completely bogus rubbish. But these are only averages. The longevity statistics are notoriously unreliable in the later stages of life, where actuaries say new forms of treatment can prolong life by years. Not for the poor people. That's only for the rich folk who can have their life extension therapies. Even if you conformed to the average, there is much else to consider in building a plan to make the money last. How rapidly you might want to spend it, and how you would invest the rest are just some of the issues. Work out your income needs. The most important step of any financial planning for old age is figuring out how much income you will need. Kusal Ariyawansa, none of these people have got English names anymore. A financial planner at Appleton Gerard says, for many, converting your savings into a retirement income has the same effect as a cold shower, as there is a significant drop in income. Your starting point should be to identify your fixed costs, which will reveal how much money there is to maintain your lifestyle above and beyond the bare necessities. Why are they telling this to pensioners? This is the stuff that should be taught at school, how to budget. But they don't tell you that, of course. They just, you leave school at 18 and they give you a credit card. You go on, spend, get yourself in debt. Go to university, get yourself in debt. They don't tell you anything about budgeting. Building a margin for error. The error is going to university and getting a degree, which is worthless. Having ascertained your income needs, work out how thinly you have to spread your savings. Or thickly. They don't mention thickly here. At a basic level, if you have saved 200,000, you might see this stretching to 11,000 a year over 18 years. However, you should bear in mind that a life expectancy estimate is merely a best guess, says Christopher Palfrey, director of increaseyourpension.co.uk. Retirees have to test out any plans against a position being that of an outlier. He says, you might receive a number saying that you are likely to live on 286 on average, but what happens if you live to 106? They don't estimate it. You might go at 66. Do not forget to factor in the rising cost of living. For instance, if you spend 10,000 a year today, you might need 15,200 a year to make the same purchases by the time you die, or maybe next year, the way things are going. This figure, calculated by Jonathan Colgan, a planner at Combined Financial Strategies, is based on a 65-year-old living 18 years and inflation averaging 2.5%. Yeah, wait till it goes to 10% and 20%. Plot a course of retirement. Most pensioners require income in the shape of a tick, according to Alistair Cunningham, a director of Wingate Financial Planning. Your expenditure needs typically start off high, possibly more than in working life, as you do all the things you wanted, but lack the time or money. then your needs start to wane. That's the downward movement of the tick as you get slightly older. So as you get slightly older, you don't need much, but because you're just a consumer then. You're just a consumer. You're not a producer anymore. The final life stroke of a tick is often due to deteriorating health. Just as people are poor at predicting life expectancy, they're also poor at predicting health. Mr. Cunningham says, the cost of care is the sting in the tail, the great unknown, and could be as high as $85,000 a year. So there you go. They're putting fear into the equation. You might need $85,000 a year just to look after yourself, or you'll die very, very young after retirement. A good financial advisor, I don't think there is such a thing. You could find one it's just a big advert. Will be able to plug this information into a cash flow forecaster, which simply models how your income needs will change over time, factoring in inflation and investment returns. So it's just a big ad for the actuaries and the pension companies who want to take your money off you and say, oh, well, we'll invest it for you. We'll invest it for you. And then you pop your clogs a couple of years later and they keep it. That's the way it works. So last one of the night, the Mirror. Now, I wasn't going to bother with this article, but I thought, well, all sympathy to the mother and the father and children, of course, and any other friends and relatives who've been victims of this in some way or another. But the mother being quizzed by police over murder of 3 disabled children was struggling to cope. Friends, these 3 children apparently had a genetic disorder that made them severely disabled. Now, we know where this is going. She's got 3 children with a genetic illness, which is life-limiting. And I guarantee you, in the next month, 6 weeks, 2 months, whatever, they'll start coming out and saying that people who have these types of children shouldn't be allowed to come into the world. And they should be aborted, or people likely to have these disabled children with these defective genes, they'll call them, will have to be sterilised because we can't have any more defective people in the world. I think that's all been said before, and that's the way this is going. So I'm not going to read this article out, but again, sympathy for the mother and the father and, of course, the children. But that's where it's going. This article is all about eugenics. And, well, what can I say? We'll go to the last piece of music for the night, and we'll see you on Monday, where I should have Sonia Poulton on as a guest. Thank you, and good night, and hopefully I can get home if the motorway's open again.
No lizards, no aliens, no nonsense. This is Reality Bytes in association with Sovereign Independent UK and One World Chronicle.